Ooh, there we go. Right. I hopefully everyone can hear me. And we'll just wait just 1 or 2 more minutes to see to check that everyone's managed to get in. Um, doo-doo. But maybe Maya, do you want to just give me a thumbs up that you can hear and see us? Lovely. There we go. Um, well, we won't wait too long then because the session is going to be recorded. Thanks for everyone who's joining live. You'll all be microphone switched off, camera switched off, but you're very, very welcome to put any questions that you have in the Q&A chat. And our colleague Maya is going to be moderating that. So if there's any questions she can easily answer, she'll add it to the chat. If not, we'll take some questions at the end. And if we don't get through all the questions, then we will be sending out the link for anyone who couldn't join live to watch at another time, and we'll add any sort of Q&A that we need to get through there. So thanks everybody for joining. A busy period for Christmas and for forestry. So yeah, really, really appreciate your time. I am Katie. I'm the CEO at Re-Genus, and I'm going to be moderating the panel of lovely folks that we've got today to make sure we keep to time and also get to our goals of thinking about the invisible microbiome and why it's so important for establishing trees. So yeah, we've talked about the Q&A, and yeah, we'll send the webinar out afterwards. So I wanted to start very, very briefly just to introduce myself and the company, and then hand over to the panel of speakers that's going to, we're just going to have a moderated session. So there's no slides. We're going to just have a conversation about why all this is so important and what's going on underneath the soil. So I am the CEO of Re-Genus. I came to the company from being CEO of a company called Nature Metrics for 5 years. And at Nature Metrics, we monitored nature using DNA. We did loads of work with forestry research and Forestry England. And there we were looking at the DNA in the soil, so trying to really understand what species were living in the soil and what functions they had. And this is something that was super, super exciting because we were one of the pioneers able to really understand the thousands and thousands of species that make up the microbiome that help these incredible trees that we see in the forest to flourish and to thrive. And so the work I was doing there with Forestry England and Forest Research was looking at how can we help trees to establish, how can we meet the targets that the UK has got to grow the amount of trees, the amount of woodland from a biodiversity perspective, from a carbon perspective, and also create more resilience to climate change. And I can't tell you all the results, but what I can tell you is DNA helped us to understand that there were thousands and thousands and thousands of species doing so many different functions in a microbiome, and they're all really vital functions. And as you look across many different types of woodlands, many different types of soils in many different parts of the country, there might be many different species performing these functions, but the important thing is in a healthy soil, there are a set of functions that are always present. It's like a superorganism doing its thing, delivering carbon cycling and nitrogen fixing and interacting with the roots of the trees and the plants and all of these things. We were able to open up and show that they're always present and they're always important as in all the sorts of healthy environments that, but whether that be a forest or also in agricultural fields. So when I met Daniel, who's the founder of what was Woodland Grow and now Re-Genus, I thought, oh, this is exciting because he told me that he had a way to recreate a sort of healthy, natural microbiome and give that back to the forests and the farmers that were sort of lacking this important part of the ecosystem that we can't see. So that's how this all came about. So that's me, but now we're going to hear from some real experts. And we're super excited and privileged to have George Eustace as our one of our board advisors, former Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And he brings a wealth of experience, but also real passion about the topic to our business. And I think it's fair to say that it's quite a rare and precious quality in politicians nowadays to sort of have real conviction and passion for the subject that they're working on. Sorry, George, you don't have to nod, but so I wondered if you could start by just telling us a little bit about yourself and why you think soils and all the stuff living in the soils is important, and then tell us a bit about, you know, why what are the policy challenges and opportunities you see to really support that if it's so important.
Well, thank you very much, Katie. And I studied horticulture many, many years ago in the early 1990s. And it's fair to say that the idea of the mycorrhizal effect is not a new one. It was taught even then when I was at college at Writtle many years ago. But I think it's fair to say that in recent decades, certainly since the Second World War, the idea that the soil is a living thing and that there's an ecology as well as a medium has been largely forgotten or neglected. It's been understood, but it's just not been valued as much as it should. And so when I was the Minister in Agriculture and we had the chance to set a different course as we left the European Union, I really wanted to put soil health absolutely at the centre of what we were doing. Because, and I was particularly influenced by a very famous book called An Agricultural Testament, written by Sir Albert Howard, seen by some as the sort of, you know, godfather, if you like, of the organics movement. But crucially, between the wars, he did a lot of really important work and studies to effectively try and ascertain how you could mimic the forest effect, as he called it, the natural forest effect, where you had beneficial fungi and bacteria working in all sorts of complex interactions that we didn't fully understand, but which we could clearly observe and know that it was real. And so what I did when I was Agriculture Minister is have a whole set of policies that focused on soil health, improving the organic matter in the soil, improving the ecology of the soil. And my view was that if you could get that bit right, a lot of other things would take care of themselves. You could have reduced input fertilizers, you could have a significant reduction or removal of certain pesticides that we'd become over dependent on. And crucially, you would just have better, more nutritious food at the end of it as well. So what I've really found interesting about the work that Re-Genus has been doing, and the purpose of the discussion today, is very much around tree establishment and tree health. And one of the things that I was very keen on when I was a minister is not just talking about tree planting. You know, we had lots of targets for planting millions and millions of trees, but often what we used to find is that a decade on, a lot of them had died. You know, there'd been physical damage, or the drought, they'd succumbed to drought, or they just hadn't really got away, and they'd foundered in those first crucial 5 years. So I was keen that we move towards understanding the importance of tree establishment rather than just tree planting. And to get successful tree establishment, as anyone in forestry knows, it's a challenge. You've got to get lots of things right. But probably the most important thing to get right is the health of the soil that you put that sapling into in the first place, so that you can get strong fibrous roots that then get the plant off to the best possible start. And to make use of that mycorrhizal effect and those interactions between the plant roots and beneficial fungi and bacteria, in order to make sure you've got that best possible start for the tree. So that's what the Woodland Grow product has done. And I know Daniel and Philip, who are on this panel, can give a much more detailed account than I can of the results they've seen to date. But I think it really is quite exciting, and it does show that, you know, if we don't just see soil as a medium for NPK, but we see it instead as something that's living, and that there's a much broader ecology to that soil. If we get that bit right, that's when we start to really see important results.
Brilliant, thanks, George. And I think we'll come back again at the end to some more questions around the policy side of things and what government could or should be doing at the moment. But moving on to Dan. Dan, you founded Woodland Grow, the precursor to Re-Genus, a number of years ago. So I thought maybe you could start off just by telling us how on earth you came to the conclusion that fungi and microbiome was the key to unlock tree establishment and healthy soils.
Yeah, so I bought a Woodland as a contribution to the future or the environment and wanting to do something positive with the family and the children. And as part of the woodland management, we needed to clear fell because it had been a plantation from the 1960s without any way of getting the trees out once they'd met their maturity. So as part of that, I thought it'd be a really good idea to grow my own trees in the family nursery. We've grown plants for 3 generations, and I thought, how hard could it be to switch from growing plants to growing trees? And I grew them all and then planted them, and it was a really hard frost, and we had a bit of weevil on site, and they all nearly died. They went really yellow, really horrible, and within a couple of weeks. And the forester at the time just said, look, this is normal, don't worry about it. It's worse with bare root, better with cell grown, but if you just wait, they'll get going. The bit I couldn't get past was I'd done everything I could in the nursery to make them as healthy as possible. I'd grown them in peat and reduced peat and peat-free. I'd used, the synthetic fertiliser. I'd got them nice and green, planted them all up. But actually in a woodland, it's all fungi, it's all bacteria, it's all organic matter and nutrition. And there was a gap, a nature gap. And I think most people in forestry see that gap as being probably 1, 2, if not 3 years before the tree then creates enough microbiome around it to then start growing. So I then fortunate enough to win grants from the Forestry Commission, the Welsh Government and Scottish Government to effectively create a tree nursery in my woodland and fix a very, very specific problem, which is how do you mimic woodland soils and bring it into the tree nursery so that when you plant the tree, it starts growing straight away. And I think it's quite a very specific problem, but it's also a very complex problem because soils in woodlands are the most complex we have on this earth. But as part of that project, one of the things that we wanted to understand was when you plant the tree, what happens to the fungi and bacteria that we've gone and created, and how does then that transition to the planting site? Because that was quite an important part of the project. But what we were finding by doing a lot of analysis on a lot of soils that where trees were getting planted is there just wasn't sufficient numbers of fungi for the trees. And that's why it was contributing to this nature gap. It wasn't just that it was a hot spring. It was also there wasn't enough fungi in the soil to actually retain the nutrition, retain the moisture for the tree to transition. So I think that's where it started, and that's where the problem is. But I've got to say, very grateful for the Forestry Commission and ultimately George, because that was his policy that he ended up facilitating that as innovation. Without the innovation and taking those risks and trying to solve that problem, I don't think we'd have been able to do it because it did take quite a lot of effort over a number of years and taking a lot of risks because trying to mimic woodland soil is actually really, really complicated. And that's, we did DNA analysis, we've done nutrition analysis, we've done microscopy. And I think it's actually quite hard to test soil to get what does healthy look like. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question of why we started and what we're doing, but Woodland Grow is about creating the right conditions for a tree to access nutrition, because trees cannot take nutrition up unless it's been passed to it by a fungi or it's soluble. And soluble nutrition is in the form of synthetics, and everywhere else it has to be broken down by fungi and do a nutrient exchange. And between the bacteria and the fungi and the roots and the plant, the root gives up its sugars and attracts the fungi and bacteria, and it's that symbiotic relationship. And without fungi, you just don't get access to that nutrition. And I think that's the fundamental point or key from this whole project is everyone knows trees need fungi, but where do you get them from? How do you grow them? How do you feed them? What do you feed them? And then how do you transition them from nursery to woodland?
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, I think we'll definitely come back to that question later about how do we know what a healthy soil looks like and what we're growing. But now I want to move on to Margaret. We've been so super lucky in Re-Genus to have some incredible partners on our journey so far. The sort of early adopters and partners for a startup are the sort of thing that either makes or breaks a startup. So Margaret has decades of experience in the forestry industry and works for a company called Alba. So, Margaret, maybe you could start by just telling us a little bit about Alba and your role at Alba. And yeah, well, why don't you start there?
Hi there. I've been at Alba Trees for over 20 years now, and it's fair to say I'm passionate about trees and the environment. And I think we probably all are at Alba, otherwise we wouldn't be doing what we're doing. But, Alba Trees are the largest cell-grown nursery in the UK. We've been here for over 37 years now. And, we have a lot of experience in producing premium trees for forestry. We grow over 20 million trees in 3 different sites, over 65 acres here in East Lothian, Scotland. And we directly employ 85 people, and we're a major employer in the local community. So we specialise in the production of native species for woodland creation projects and also improved trees for timber plantations. And we're proud of the fact that we're Plant Healthy accredited and UKISG certified. And we've been working for a number of years now to achieve carbon neutral accreditation, and we're still working towards that. But we're passionate about sustainability and how we grow our crops in a more sustainable way, but how we also manage the business in a more sustainable way. All our crops have been grown in peat-free growing media since the start of 2025. And, that's obviously the right thing to do. But we also employ a plant healthy and biosecurity manager, a dedicated manager to look after all of that as well. And we also work closely with the community and support local schools, colleges, Woodlands, and our current charity is Social Bite.
Brilliant, thanks, Margaret. With a follow-up question, what are the big issues, both environmental and tree establishment, that you think your customers are wanting to overcome? And what are the things that you think we can help with there?
I think it's all about sustainability, isn't it? And we prioritise sustainability in all our operations, and you're always looking at ways to positively impact the environment in the ways that we work here. And that kind of led us to thinking about more innovative ways in which we can grow our trees. Whether that's looking at reducing weeds and liverwort, which is a big issue for nurseries, so that we can improve our yields and be more efficient as a business, but also looking at how we can produce more robust, healthy trees that will establish well in the field and also have a positive impact on the environment. And that's why we're working closely with Re-Genus to look at how we can achieve that.
Brilliant, thanks, Margaret. We may come back in a moment to talk more about the various products that Alba are working with us on now. But at this point, I wanted to bring in Phil. So my favourite part, because it's actually about one of our users on the ground who's been planting woodland grow trees. So again, we're always super grateful for people that don't just talk, but also put their sort of money where their mouth is and take a bit of a chance to be one of our sort of first early adopters. So Phil is also super experienced in the forestry industry, has worked in the sort of more mainstream forestry industry and now works for Kelpie Woodland. So maybe, Phil, you can tell us, like, why on earth did you decide to work with a little startup, and what have been your experiences so far?
Right. Thanks, Katie. Yeah, well, woodland creation traditionally has been sort of pushed to the margins, and we've been working for a number of years on sites which have got poor fertility, and the standard practice has been putting in synthetic fertilizers at time of planting to get these trees established. And that synthetic fertilizer has been NPK mix, which is nitrogen, phosphate, potassium. Very little development over a number of years since I've been in forestry. So the last 15 years, we started using, in conjunction with the forest nurseries, a slow release fertilizer, which is applied at time of planting in the planting hole with the tree. What we found with this is, yeah, we're getting growth in the first sort of 2 to 3 years, a lot of apical growth. So the trees are getting tall pretty quickly. But then the effect of that tree, of that fertilizer after a couple of years, we're finding that the tree is actually slowing down. And we looked at the root systems of these trees. We dug a number of them up, and we found that the root system hasn't actually grown. And so underground, what's happening, the tree's sort of becoming lazy, just taking those nutrients which were there in the synthetic fertilizer. And then the tree gets to a point where it's actually it can't actually take, as Daniel was saying, it can't take those nutrients there up anymore. That sort of effect has slowed down. So, and then on the other side of things, for restock sites, what's happening because of climate change, we're getting more weevils coming out. And so foresters are now going back to what was traditional practice of going to fallow periods. So the fallow period could be 3 to 5 years after those trees are felled. And what we're finding there is that the fungi that was in the soils is gone. It's died. The good bacteria is gone, and it's been replaced by bad bacteria and bad fungi. And so at time of restocking after 3 to 5 years, we're then having to add fertilizer again, and we're pushed down the line of synthetic fertilizers. At year 1, we're putting a fertilizer in, and then potentially again years 6, 7, and maybe even 15 years, up to the point where there's actually nutrient recycling through canopy closure. So healthy soils are really the key to good establishment, and where the soils have microbial support, tree rooting's improved, and we're seeing a more fibrous root. And the tree is working with the fungi in the soil. It's working with the soil. The soil is living, and you're getting this, as Daniel was saying, this sort of symbiotic relationship. So again, that leads to a more resilient tree with improved growth. Because as a forester, what we're trying to do is get that tree established, as George was saying, within a short period of time, and reduce our losses and reduces our input into that site, so those trees can get away and become healthy. So I was doing a bit of work with actually alternatives to ground preparation techniques with a contractor to reduce weevil populations, and Daniel was working with the same contractor, and that's how we got in touch. And Daniel mentioned his Woodland Grow fertilizer, so we said, right, we'll trial this out on one of our new creation sites. And so what we did, we split the site in half, and so we've got about 15 hectares of the site, which we planted with trees from Alba trees and cell-grown trees, a mixture of birch, rowan, aspens, oaks, willows, and hazels. And we split as I said, the site in half, and we used traditional fertilizer on one side, and on the other side, we added a top dressing of pellets produced by Woodland Grow after planting. And I was impressed after the first year's growth, the difference between the two sides. We're getting much better growth on those trees. We're getting a much better root system, a big fibrous root system. We had less losses on the site where Woodland Grow was put on. So we had less beat up. The trees are getting away in terms of their height So they're getting away from the browsing pressure from rabbits and hares early on. So we're reducing our costs going forward as well in terms of weeding. We're not having to weed those sites. A site which was traditionally fertilized, we're having to go back and do a hand weeding around those trees.
Can I just ask a couple of questions,
yes.
Phil? Sorry, like one of the things that you talked about was synthetic fertilizer. You get a response from the tree and you just get a tall leader. Is that the case? And what was the difference where Woodland Grow was?
Yeah, the trees where the Woodland Grow was different. We're getting more leaf mass. We're getting more branching in terms of these are the native trees, which we're looking for. So that there seems to be above ground. There's more woody mass happening. The stems are getting thicker, and so it's visually it's a lot healthier tree. And we had
and
less
you can
losses.
see a difference. I mean, I know we sent our agronomist to go and do a measurement, and I've seen the pictures, but it's hard for me to see. I've seen the data, but when you sit at the site and look from left to right, can you see the difference?
Oh, definitely. There's a height difference, but also there's a difference in the shape of the trees. You know, if you're just looking at them as a layperson, you'd see that the trees with the Woodland Grow, a lot more branching, a lot more leafing. The leaves are bigger than the leaves on the other side as well. So the trees just look a lot more healthier.
Definitely missed this. Did you say that one side was Woodland Grow and the other side was just Albacels or Albacels plus synthetic?
Albacels plus synthetic. Yes.
So we've gone right. Okay, so that to me so just for anyone that's on the call, then the numbers I think were they're on a LinkedIn post, but one of the tree species was 76 centimeters tall on the synthetic side and 131 centimeters tall on the Woodland Grow side. So I thought the differences were between untreated and treated, but we're saying both are treated.
No, but both sides are treated. Yes. One with synthetic and one with Woodland Grow. So
right,
yeah,
okay.
and there's a definite marked difference in the Woodland Grow side here. So yeah.
Well, that you just made my day, Phil.
Yeah, sorry, I kept that one back. Yeah.
And just to follow up though, Phil, the one of the things that everyone worries about with green products is the unit economics and whether it makes financial sense. So we had a bit of a chat about this yesterday, but maybe you could talk a little bit to that in terms of the what you think the sort of cost benefits are going to be with the tree establishment.
Yeah, well, the application was the same cost in terms of the labour cost. The product was slightly more expensive than a synthetic fertiliser, but looking long term, we're not going to have to, if this goes forward, we don't have to do the extra weeding, which is a big expense, both in manual terms, but if you have to go down a chemical route, you're putting chemicals on. Most foresters now are looking at chemical minimisation strategies. So in terms of if the woodlands are registered under the UK Woodland Assurance Scheme, or even through looking in terms of the Woodland Carbon Code as well. So we're trying to reduce our carbon footprint as well as foresters. So, and it makes more sense to me as a forester to buy a product as well, which is grown or made in the UK. Effectively, it's grown in the UK, rather than importing synthetic fertilizers from halfway around the world, where we're getting stuff from in Tunisia, Egypt, you know, for our phosphates, you know.
Brilliant, thank you. Oh yeah, Margaret.
Can I just say, Phil, as well, that you're not going to have to reapply that in year 3 or year 5 or year 10.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at, and I think going forward, for restock sites, not woodland creation sites, you're going quite often. You go into these sort of 3 phases of fertilization, and if we can get it right in the first 2 years, and we get that symbiotic relationship going, then we would hope we wouldn't have to go and do a second or even a third stage fertilizer. And so you think of the cost implications of that, but also the implications of putting synthetic fertilizers on again, and a lot of that's wasted in terms of, on the poorer sites in terms of as leaching. And if you're going to say the 3rd year or the 3rd application of aerial fertilization, how much is that actually going to the tree? It doesn't make sense financially.
When I started this and I was trying to talk to a lot of foresters, it originally started off as just a grow media because that's what we're using to grow the trees as part of the project. And a lot of people, and I know some are on this call, were very factual with me and they just said, that's just not going to work. You know, you're not going to be able to take compost up to the top of a hill and fertilize a million trees. You need to be able to do something about it. I think one of the things I've found with foresters is whilst they're conservative, they're also willing to try and they're willing to give feedback and they do want to move forward. And quite a lot of the things that I was talking about a long time ago was no leaching, no carbon in this, no CO2 in the production, there was no chemicals, there was no toxins, and nobody really cared about that. It was just what the output was. And I think now we've kind of got over the hump of you can now see something. It's nice to now hear people saying, well, actually, I don't want a lot of CO2 in my product. I don't want any leaching. I don't want any toxics with handling. And so perhaps I just try to solve the wrong problems first, but it's nice that they're all part of the system now, that you want extra growth, but actually those extra externalities are actually a bonus or a benefit. Because I think, when I first started saying we're 99% less CO2 than synthetic fertilizer, most people just said to me, and what does that mean?
Cool, thank you. Thanks, Dan. George, I want to come back to you now because we feel quite excited about these early results, but and there's a lot of push for tree planting and woodland establishment and nature-based solutions and that sort of thing in the UK. But I just wondered, what's your view on the sort of policy challenges, opportunities that we have in the UK right now to sort of, push this agenda, if it's, of soil health and better tree establishment?
Yeah, I think picking up on what Daniel said about the forestry sector and foresters, my view is they've always understood the importance of provenance when it comes to particular species of tree. They'll often try to make sure it's from a particular locality, and that understanding that there's something much more complex than just the physiology of the seed is, I think, it's always been sort of understood. It's part of the art, in a way, of successful forestry, and therefore I think that there should be an openness to understanding that if you can capture a whole microbial population from a forest area and bring that into your compost, and you're doing something that goes with the grain, if you like, of that forestry sort of understanding around provenance. And so when it comes to policy, I mean, there's two areas really where the government intervenes. One is grants effectively to establish woodland, and that tends to focus on trees, but also other bits that go with the tree guards and that kind of thing. And then there's a maintenance component as well that when I was minister, I was keen to bring in, because it's not just about, as I said, putting the trees in the ground. There's a maintenance component to sort of getting them successfully through those first few years. And I think the interesting thing would be whether this kind of approach, the Woodland Grow product, could be supported or recognised through that grant regime, either because the trees are, Ellipot whips sort of have got the right compost, they've got the right start there, and that's recognised and can be supported through, the grant process, or that, in the medium term, there's some provision for, improving that soil health and getting the soil microbiome where it needs to be to get successful tree establishment. So I think there are some things that could be looked at in terms of eligibility under certain grants. I'm not sure quite how this fits at the moment. Possibly elements of it could already fit within the grant regime. And then I think there's a final sort of element to this debate that we just need to bear in mind. So I've spent quite a lot of time looking at biostimulants and microbials in other sectors. And if you look at certain arable crops, there are some quite successful, quite well developed biostimulants that are typically a cocktail of bacillus bacteria. And in some of these arable sectors, they focus principally on on beneficial bacteria because they tend to be slightly more predictable about how they operate, in that you can take a cocktail of 7 or 8 different beneficial bacteria and know that on certain arable crops it's probably going to give you a good effect. What's different about Re-Genus is that they're recognizing that when it comes to fungi, it's much more complicated than that. So it's very difficult to say, here are the 4 fungi that are going to make the difference and move the dial, because the interactions between, multiple species of fungi are what give you the effect. And we don't properly understand it yet. We just know that there is, a complex web of symbiotic relationships, and therefore you need to capture the whole population. You can't pick 3 or 4 winners in the way that you can sometimes actually with bacterial biostimulants. So I think that the other big difference with Re-Genus is it's not trying to go down into silos and say these are the 3 or 4 fungi that we need. It basically recognizes that soil health comes from the whole population, and therefore you need to effectively nurture and collect that whole population of fungi to get the impact that you want. And I think that's another important difference really between the approach that Re-Genus take and how some others approach this as well. And I think when it comes to trees, I think the fungi are important and necessary. I don't think you can just do it on the bacteria-based biostimulants. You need that. You need the benefits that you get from fungi from a woodland system.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks, George. There's it's one of the reasons actually that when Dan and I looked at how do we create a business and a VC-backed, fast-growing business, when you look at just forestry, because we want to put back a natural microbiome rather than some lab-grown single strains of bacteria or fungi, when we put the product in, it then proliferates and grows itself. And so it's a sort of one and done approach. And therefore, we told our investors, we don't want a recurring business model in fungi. We want to give the soil back what it needs and we want it to grow. And that's why one of the reasons why we went into agriculture, where actually you can regrow the fungi and put the microbiome back, but then you've got this recurring business model of adding natural nutrition back, because the farming system is much more extractive and you will tend to need that sort of ongoing addition of natural nutrition. But saying to investors that you want your customers to use less fertilizer over time, you want them to be able to establish a microbiome and for that to grow and proliferate naturally, is you have to have the right type of investors on board to do that. But
yes, I think there's a tendency as well, and I mentioned earlier Albert Howard, who did a lot of pioneering thought in this area. He was scathing of effectively the political class in particular. You'll be pleased to hear, but the academic institutions as well, for always wanting to sort of measure everything but understand nothing, as he used to term it. That there's a tendency to always want to zoom in and try to understand one little element of a system. But actually, the truth is, soil health, it's a bit like a mosaic picture, that if you zoom in on any one bit too closely, it frankly doesn't make much sense. It's only really, like so much in our environment, when you take several steps back, the picture, you can see it, you can observe it, it becomes real. And that's why we just sometimes need to prevent ourselves from wanting to understand every little bit of things up close, because actually it doesn't work in that way. It's an interaction and a complex interaction at that. And so it's only when you step back that you can sometimes see the picture.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the things that we observed in the trials that we were working on, where we were growing trees with just bark fines, which is a kind of 80% of most growing media. We did bark fines with nutrition, and then we did bark fines, nutrition and biology. And each time you could see the trees getting healthier and bigger for each part of that combination. So we absolutely know that it's the system level approach as opposed to the individual approach. And from some of the DNA work we were doing, you could see different levels of unknown fungi interacting with the plants. And actually, to us, the complexity of what we were creating and what the plants were doing, the plants knew more than we did. And I think the analogy I have is, when you're talking about soil, you've got to think about it like a cake. You've got your flours, you've got the fats in there, you've got the sugar, you've got an egg, and the egg is good. And to me, fungi is like the egg. You want a really good egg, and you're going to go down to the shop and get a really organic, free range egg, and you go, no, I've got a really good egg. But unless you take the whole cake with it, if you drop that egg in a field, all you've got is egg in the field. You haven't got the whole community go with it to actually create a cake. And I think that's the one thing that we've learned from this whole project is you can grow a tree to a certain level with each one of those individual components, but it's not until you put it all together. And we did, for anyone who doesn't know what the product is, Woodland Grow is forest residue, which is bark fines, which you get a lot of compounds that come off from that, like the tannins, and there's loads of things that come off it that we haven't really even established yet as an industry. But I think the Scottish Forestry have got a 100-odd page document that talks about all the different chemical compounds you can get from bark and turn it into, replacing the synthetic versions. So bark fines, forest residues, really, really complex and a really good medium for us. We then use what we call starter, which is like a 10% portion of that, and that is a highly rich fungal community with bacteria, nutrient cycling microbes. And then we've got nutrition, which is there to feed the microbes, which then feed the plants. And we blend it all together, and we have a growing media, which we fill into Ella pots, and then Alba trees grow the trees. And then we then pellet it with our partners Land Energy, and then they get delivered to clients like Phil, who then applies it as a top dress and as a fertiliser bit. But one of the things is that compost that we worked on, we looked at hot composting, which is just bacteria derived. We looked at vermicomposting, which is worm derived, and we did what was a static aerated pile left in an environment for a year, and then did DNA analysis on each one. And whilst there was abundance of fungi in each, the complexity, which is the number of groups of fungi and their ratios to each other, was different depending on whether it's hot compost, vermicompost, or what is the static aerated pile. So actually, quite a lot of the work we did was trying to understand what even complex is and also how to measure it. I think being able to then create it is perhaps the last part of the puzzle, because if you don't know how to measure it, you don't know how to recreate it, and you don't know what good looks like. And I think we talked earlier about good bacteria and good fungi, bad fungi. The only point I think I want to leave on is about imbalance and not imbalance, because if you've got growing media that's got green waste compost in it, for example, you are what you eat in the microbial world as you are in the human world. So if you eat Mars bars all day, you're going to be really unhealthy, and you're not going to be able to resist a cold and a flu, because you're just taking in sugars, and it's not this diverse source of food or microbes that come on your food. And it's the same with the fungi and bacteria. We were able to observe reduced pest from aphids and reduced diseases from mildew by having a more complex microbiome, and you can see it in the DNA results.
Thanks, Dan. Phil, just going on to that sort of practical sort of measuring and what we're looking for a bit. There's been a couple of questions around, whether we've got a paper on the work we've done so far, and Maya's posted a link in the chat to a case study that we've got. A lot of the trials that we've done early on have been with incredible early paying customers, and so they haven't been set up as like extremely robust scientific experiments, but we're now trying to sort of catch up and raising money to do some more robust experiments, but also keep working and expanding with our customers. So, but Phil, this was just the first year. What are the things that you're sort of hoping for as we go? What are you going to be measuring and looking for in terms of, that difference between what we offer and what synthetic fertilizer offers, and what excites you about the potential for the future?
There's two things on the Woodland Creation site where we've done the main trial. What we're going to go and do is early summer next year, we're going to go and do some measurements again and work with Daniel again on this in terms of height, but also mass of the tree, and then also digging up some of those trees as well, and looking at the root structures. And then we'll be able to give some more data to this single trial. And also going forward as well, we've got a site which is probably about half a mile away from the original site, planted at the same time. And we're actually going to apply a top dressing to that next year, early part of the year, to see the results of that, because that site's struggling. So it'll be interesting to find out what happens with that site as well.
We've talked about what the foresters see, but in the world that I've been, it's always been about the microbial community and microscopy. And I think for that particular site, we saw the fungi compared from one side to the other increase by about 240% from some of the samples. And I think it was like 3000% on some of the other samples. And the amount of fungi that was under a 1-year-old tree was probably equivalent to a 20-year-old tree. But you've seen microscopy results, because we did some sampling before, didn't we? You know, we did a field, we did an old woodland, we did a new planting. I mean, I know you're an experienced forester, but I don't believe microscopy is your normal tool set. I mean, did you find it easy to navigate?
It was interesting because generally foresters will work on the basis of national vegetation classifications before we go and plant a site, and then we feed that into the ecological site classification, and that gives us, and with the soils, and that gives us a basic data and of what we're going to plant and where we're going to plant it. But the actual soil itself isn't really looked at in detail, and I think that's what's been missing in terms of, you know, what's going on in the soil. And the data we got from you, Daniel, before we did the sites and then following up is really interesting to, you know, just to see what's going on and actually improvement in that soil. So I mean, that's great news for the future. And I think we, you know, for new woodland creation sites, I think we should be maybe adopting that and actually doing some soil testing prior to.
I think it should be part of the grant that you just get to do microscopy, because fungi hold on to nutrition and they hold on to water, and they create this, you know, the porosity within the soil that also then holds onto the water. So where we have these, you know, drenches of rain like we do now, management of land, actually forestry has a big part of that, to hold back the water going through the system. But also, to me, it's also part of that hot spring problem that we're now starting to see in the last 5 years, where, you know, when and how long you can plant your new woodland trees, and equally the previous are then starting to suffer with degraded soil, no fungi and no water.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, the planting seasons have changed. You know, when I started in forestry, we had set planting seasons, which was winter and early spring. And what we found, because of climate change, is that the springs are getting a lot drier, especially in the north of Scotland. And we're pushing the boundaries of where we plant. And actually, we're getting better results quite often in early summer and late summer. And Margaret can probably, you know, say something about, you know, in terms of the tree production and when she's putting trees out, maybe.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, we, you know, being a cell-grown nursery, you can extend the planting season anyway from sort of September right through to May. But what we've seen in the last maybe 4 or 5 years is that there's been really dry springs where some of our bigger customers stop planting in April and start again in June and go right through to August. And they've had some of their best establishments then. So that is a recurring theme, I think, you know, as the climate changes, and we have to sort of think about how we address that and what can we do to, you know, for us as an industry, how do we face those challenges?
Well, we did some trials as part of this with our growing media versus an industry standard grow media, and our worry was about nursery and water usage, you know, being able to just keep the plants alive within the nursery. But what we found was, for every 4 days, we retained 5% more water in our growing media in the nursery. But when you actually extrapolate that over a month, you know, it's literally 25% less water loss in that cell compared to the peat-free industry standard. So for me, if that translated from nursery into a woodland, then you'd actually have a bit more water retention around the plant. But also, if you've then got the fungi in the soils active, then that's going to be, a lot better as well.
Dan, there's a couple of questions just about do we know about how the fungi and the microbiome is going to work in different soils, different conditions?
Yeah.
Whether we think the fungi is going to outcompete in some areas, the natural fungi and that sort of thing. So could you talk a little bit to that?
It's a really good question, and it comes back to the other point, which is this isn't just about fungi. I know we're talking about fungi because fungi is important and it is the key, but you've got to have the organic matter, the nutrition, and the biology. I think for us, the plant does the choosing, and we saw that in the nursery, and we see that out in the real world. We work on the basis of, I think it's 1 million spores a gram of our fertiliser. So that ends up being, on a hectare, about 60 billion spores of fungi. There's 1,000 type of fungi, and that's different groups. So from the saprotrophic through to arbuscular, through to all the different combinations. It's the cake analogy. So for us, this isn't about our fungi is the best fungi and it's going to be there for the next 30 years. Actually, what happens is a microbiome from an early, intermediate and late stage woodland changes, and the different communities get bigger or smaller depending on their role and their function. So I think the first assumption is that you've got microbiome and it's good. Well, that's something we can check. So we do microscopy on a commercial basis. So if you've got a planting site, we can analyze it and see if you've actually even got enough abundance. There's DNA out there for people that are concerned, and we can look at that. But I think for everything we've done and the trials we've done, we've not seen a detriment on the basis that the plant is doing the choosing. And we see that time and again with the way in which we're growing. I think the other thing is, if you do have native fungi, and I think there's some paper and research on this, that natives will always do better than the ones that are introduced. And so that's why we don't get precious about our microbes. It's about the whole system and reducing that nature gap from 2 years to 0. And then the plant will do what it needs to do anyway. And it all will be based on the topography and the height, the pressure of where the soil is, the aspect, how much sun it has, how wet it is. The nature is way too complicated to even go to a field next door and collect a fungi and bring it to the field there. There's just too many assumptions that fungi is going to play well with all its other brothers and sisters, if there is even any there. So to me, it's always about community. It's a self-selected community, and it's about using nature. And for us, there's about 30 natural sources of nutrition from poultry meal, feather meal, alfalfa, seaweeds, fish. It's all got different mineralization and solubilized rates to then match the growth rate of a plant. So that nutrient exchange, microbes break down the nutrition, give it to the plant when it needs it as it grows. And that's why you don't have leaching, but also why it's a system level approach.
Thanks, Dan. There's a question from Julia, which maybe I'll take, which was talking about do we tailor our product to different soil types, and how do we otherwise account for this? And I think, as Dan was saying, so far we've found that growing a natural microbiome community has meant that we're sort of offering a platter of microbes, and the plants seem to be able to choose and pick, or even offer the environment for the natural microbiome in that area to arise. But one of the bits of innovation we've been looking at, both with Alba on the tree side and also on the agriculture side for the future, is there's loads and loads of incredible data now. So I'm on the board of a company called Earthblocks that delivers lots of geospatial data for nature and climate. There's tons of amazing data on habitat types and soil types, different growth rates of trees. And once we start to work with natural raw materials and natural ingredients, we have thousands and thousands of incredible gems that nature gives us to be able to mineralize nitrogen at different rates to offer a slow release fertilizer that isn't just plastic microbeads. We have the ability to offer different levels of fungal microbiome. So we've worked with some of our customers who have very, very degraded ex-quarry sites that might need a higher level of fungi, and other people that are just replanting and restocking and need a lower level of fungi, different sites that need different pHs or different levels of organic matter. So we are looking for the sort of future of our to be an innovation where, because we've got an incredible partner, and I think at least one of them, oh yeah, Matt, hi Matt, from Land Energy is on. We've got an incredible partner who's helping us with our pelleting process, taking that to scale, and we do believe in future we can add bespoke blends to get the product just right for the people, for different soil types, forest types, tree species, and that sort of thing. But at the moment, the base product is working really well, sort of wherever we're putting it. So that's very much a sort of thing for the future. But I wondered on that, Dan, because we are thinking particularly about one issue that's really important for foresters, which is weevils. And I wondered if you could just say a little bit about the innovation that we've got planned, which is just one example of using a sort of natural ingredient to answer a question that's very much a sort of synthetic solution at the moment.
Yeah, I think the way to think about this is fungi is the key to a plant. And that's, we've shown that we can put nutrition and fungi in the same area and the plant grows. There's been no synthetic fertilizer for it to happen. So the microbes have had to break it down, do nutrient exchange and give it to the plant. So the thinking and the philosophy is, if you can do that to get it to grow, can you do that to put the compound that is toxic to a weevil into the sap via the roots, via the fungi? So taking away the spraying, taking away the amount you'd have to apply. So there's natural compounds that are on chrysanthemums, as an example, that we could put into the soil, and the trial will then be, can that be taken up by the root and go into the sap, so that when the weevils are there and they are biting it, they die. Because I think we just need to accept that weevils are there, and we can't wait for 5 years, because if you do, all that symbiotic fungi that was needing a living carbon source is gone, it's dead. So you have to replant, and I think the only way that I think is you just work within the system. So if you've got a pest, just work to that pest, get the plant to grow quicker, make it more resilient by giving it a multitude of different nutrition. And this is the thing about what we've seen. If you just give NPK, even in natural form, from one source, the plant grows to a certain standard. But if you start putting layers of N from different sources at different particle sizes in different forms, the plant is actually a lot healthier. So we've seen that, we've done it. And I think the other thing to think about is healthy soil needs that whole kit and caboodle, I suppose. And there's a lot of research out there now at Edinburgh University with very specific species of bark vines have actually been shown to reduce the efficacy of parasitic nematodes in livestock feces and in fields. So again, this philosophy of being able to influence soil and influence what science has come to solve with pharmaceuticals or particular strains of fungi, that's not how the system works. The system will sort itself out if you give it enough. And for us, that's organic matter, nutrition, bacteria, and fungi.
Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. And Phil, we were talking yesterday about how, because of the weevil problems, some land is being left fallow for a lot longer before it's being replanted. And that, again, sort of reduces the amount of microbiome and fungi that would naturally engage with the woods. And so this is another benefit then of having to, or needing to try and put the microbiome back before you replant in those areas. So I think I am going to try and wrap up because we've got 2 minutes to go. So I think we've covered the fact, George put it very eloquently at the start, that tree establishment is not just tree planting. And there's an issue that we all want to solve about how we get trees away faster, reduce losses, and particularly in the context of climate change and other diseases, how do we make sure that we're establishing healthy trees and healthy forests to really push both the industry and the nature-based solutions and the reforestation and forest planting forward. We've heard that the microbiome is super important to giving that best start for the tree, and we're super grateful to Phil and Margaret for making that happen practically with us and showing in these early trials that can already look to really give the tree that sort of a head start in life. We talked about unit economics, and just to say, at the moment, Margaret is selling trees and pellets, which is about a 5p uplift from your standard tree or standard fertiliser. So when you take into consideration that better growth rates, better establishment, less losses, 5p a tree we think isn't too bad. But you can reach out to Margaret, or we also have another distributor, Green Tech, that's dealing with the sort of more landscaping part of the industry. So then George mentioned the policy environment. Grants, both to establish and to maintain, are available. We're always looking for partners to innovate with, to do grants with. I know that there are calls at the moment called Adopt, which I think are mainly being used by the farming industry, but I think agroforestry and forestry is also in there. So if there are people that want to trial, please do have a look at that, Innovate UK, Adopt grants, and or just get in contact with us, Margaret, and I'm sure also Phil's on LinkedIn, and if you want to reach out, I'm sure Phil wouldn't mind either, because we're super, super grateful for his support. So I just leaves me to say thank you ever so much to all the speakers and for all your help, and for everyone joining, and hope it's not too early to say everyone have a Merry Christmas. All right,
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Cheers.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.